Hey everyone, welcome back to a brand new deck profile. Today we're here to talk about the Dunsparce Mill deck. Now this isn't my original idea. I did actually get this from a ladder match a couple months back, and I've actually changed the list around a little. The bases are basically the same because there's really not that many ways you can play this deck, but I decided to tune some counts around. There's definitely some reworking that was done with this list because ideally, you want to be able to Dunsparce mill it as efficiently as possible. The previous list did play a copy of Dimension Valley as a stadium, which was interesting because it gave you the option to use Giraffe Rig, but I don't think you need Giraffe Rig. This deck is really just kind of a win or lose instantly kind of deck. There's just some matchups you just can't win against, and Giraffe Rig's not going to fix that. Things like Shadow Rider, where they can just hit for 50 and ignore your final dig ability, are just going to just auto win. So you just want to focus on the matchups that you can win and not worry about that. So let's get into the list anyway. We have 3 copies of this Dunsparce here. This is your main strategy, is Final Dig. If this Pokemon's knocked out by damage from an attack, discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. You pair this with the tool Cursed Shovel, which does the same thing. So theoretically, when you get a Dunsparce knocked out, your opponent is losing 4 cards from the top of their deck. And to prevent your Dunsparce from getting multiple knocked out at once, which isn't bad necessarily, but you want to keep a prize trade, and you want to always force them to hit into a Cursed Shovel one, we play Mr. Mime. This is also to keep your dolls safe on the bench. With the bench barrier, prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon by attacks. Ideally, you'd probably want to run the Fairy one in here because the weakness is rarer metal over Psychic. You could also run Mew from Unbroken Bonds, which is what this list did originally, because that Dimension Valley option gave it a Psi Power potential. Personally, I run this because it's my favorite one. I played back in 2014 and used a lot of this Mr. Mime back then. And that's what it's for, is guarding your bench. Back then it was Lando EX, now it's, all of the above. 4 copies of Clay. Clay here, you discard the top 7 cards of your deck. If any of those are item cards, put them into your hand. Considering like 40 cards in your items or 40 cards in your deck are items, you're going to be doing pretty well with that. Even the cards that are not items, like Sky Pillar, PokéStop, Chaotic Swell, and your supporter counts, can all be gotten back either with items or with Lusamine. So generally, the Clay mills, unless you just hit like all of your Lusamines right away, and then you don't mind versus Seeker for a while, that's like not going to happen though. Clay is to expand your hand. You want to build a big hand. You want to just spam Trick Shovels, always have a bunch of Cursed Shovels in play. It is really the digging deck, in a way. Have 3 copies of Cynthia. Oh, that's Lusamine. 3 copies of Cynthia here. You could run N if you want, but I don't want to shuffle my opponent's hand in. There's a lot of games where your opponent's just going to have a huge hand because they were never able to find like a shuffle draw card. And you want that because, you don't want to put their hand back in their deck. There's other, shuffle draws you could run. Definitely not Call Risk, but maybe like a Tate and Eliza to give you a switch option out of Mr. Mime if you start it. You could run N, you could run Marnie. I don't think those are good cards in here, though. I want to keep my opponent's hand big, but I also want to have outs to myself. You could also play Research. I think keeping the resources is more important, because usually, off of Cynthia, almost every time I've found a usable hand, and then a way to chain Cynthia again, if it was not suffice. Lusamine here, to any combination of supporter and stadium cards. This card should be banned, but it's not, so we're going to abuse it. You mainly use it to get back your stadiums and your Team Rocket's Handiwork, though you can also use it to get back Clay and Cynthia if you need to keep momentum at the early part of the game. Stadiums are definitely important too. That's why you run 3 Lusamine. A lot of decks run 2, and I ran 2 in one of my other lists that I showed off on this channel. 3 in here is because you mill yourself. You want to have access to finding that 3rd one, and if you prize it, you don't want to have to Peonia for it, guaranteed. You're usually only going to be able to get 1 Peonia, if even, a game. You usually don't need to unless you prized a bunch of Cursed Shovels. We'll get to Peonia. Got Team Rocket's Handiwork, the worst card in the deck, but you have to play it. Flip 2 coins for each heads, discard the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. You're going to flip like 1 heads out of 99 flips, but the time you do get the heads is game winning, so you have to play it. It's to mill your opponent. It goes in with the strategy. When the new Misfortune Sisters comes out with Lost Origin, you could probably play a copy of that too. I'm not too sure how that would work in this deck, because this deck is just kind of pure mill, so maybe you wouldn't. But I would almost play it just so I don't have to go all in on Handiwork, because Handiwork is kind of terrible. Yeah. Peonia, you look at your 3, pick up 3 prize cards, then you put 3 back from your hand. So you use this to get mainly Cursed Shovel, Life Dew, these 2 stadiums, and dolls. And then if you prize 2 Dunsparce, you want Dunsparce, because you always want 2 Dunsparce. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But mainly I use it for Cursed Shovels. There's one time I prized 3 Cursed Shovels. I checked prizes 4, 5, and 6. They were all Cursed Shovels, so I put them in my hand. You want at least 3 Cursed Shovels. You can go without 4. You want 3 Cursed Shovels. And we'll talk about that in a minute as well. 1 copy of Teammates. If you get knocked out, which you always are, basically getting knocked out, search your deck for 2 cards. You could potentially run a second copy of this. I just think 1's fine, because you typically want a Clay to build your hand. Though Teammates can be nice to get the specific tutor you need. A lot of times you're going to grab Adventure Bag and Eco Arm with like a Teammates. 3 copies of Level Ball. This is to search your Dunsparce. And your Mr. Mime. That's all it's for. Lillie's Pokédoll is a basic Pokemon that does not give up a prize, so you just throw these up with Cursed Shovels. Same thing with Robo Substitute. Lillie's Pokédoll is better because you can discard it from play and then put it on the bottom of your deck instead of just discarding it from play and it gets discarded. But you run 4/4 because this is just a pure stalling deck. Even if you don't have a Cursed Shovel attached, which ideally you really want to, you're still getting a turn, which means a Lusamine or a Team Rocket's Handiwork is going off, and you're furthering your win con. 3 copies of Adventure Bag. This searches your Cursed Shovels and your Life Dew. Searches 2 tool cards. That's all you need. 3 copies of Trainers Mail. Oh, oops. Look at the top 4, real trainer you find there, and put it into your hand. Shuffle the other cards back. This is so you can grab any trainer card. Ideally, you want to grab supporter cards out if you're going to Clay that turn, because you don't want to discard them. But really, it's up to you. I just like grabbing supporter cards and getting them into my hand so that the Clays are more live. I have Trick Shovel, 4 copies of that. This just allows you to look at the top card of your opponent's deck and discard it. If your opponent somehow put themselves into a situation where they have a 0-card hand, and you see a bad card on the top, you obviously just give it to them and don't discard it. But realistically, that situation's almost never going to come up because this isn't hand disrupting your opponent at all. You're just pure milling. The games with the deck go really fast. It's a good ladder grinder. Other than it's just auto losses to Shadow Rider, Volcarona V, and the such. 4 copies of Rescue Carrier. This is why you need 2 Dunsparce, is because you get to put up to 2 Pokemon with 90 HP or less from your discard pile into your hand. You're going to put 2 copies of Dunsparce back almost always. If Mr. Mime dies, you can also get Mr. Mime back with this, if you need the bench protection. But mainly you just want to get 2 Dunsparce back. That's why I play 3 copies, so you don't have to worry about prizing them and like starting Mr. Mime. That would be pretty bad. 4 copies of VS Seeker. Put a support card from your discard pile into your hand. You're going to use this early on to chain Clays. Later on, you can use it for Handiworks and Teammates and Lusamine. If you discard a bunch of Lusamines off of your Clay, you can use it to tutor Lusamine back into effect. Great card. You run 4 of it because it's an item, and you get items off of Clay. So it makes sense. Please give us the full art Clay in English. Please. Please give us. It's been 1,000 days since the release of the full art Clay in Japanese, and we still don't have the English one. Very sad. So when I say we wanted 3 Cursed Shovel in the deck at all times, this is because of Eco Arm. Shuffle 3 Pokemon tool cards from the discard pile into your deck. Now obviously Life Dew does factor in there as well, but mainly you want to go for Cursed Shovel when you can, especially on dolls. Cursed Shovel is better in that regard because you can set up a doll with a Cursed Shovel, where Life Dew on a doll does nothing. I usually put Life Dew if I have Mr. Mime in play to disincentivize my opponent from knocking out Mr. Mime as they make no progress on my board state, and then I'll punish them for that by bringing it back immediately. But you want 3 Cursed Shovels so you can just recycle those over and over with Eco Arm. 3 is a good count. That's generally gotten me fine through games. 1 copy of Life Dew. If it's a Pokemon that's attached to it gets knocked out, your opponent takes 1 Fear Prize card. You just give up a Fear Prize, it gives you an extra turn, and you can reuse it with Eco Arm, so it's actually great. 1 copy of Chaotic Swell. Whenever a player plays a Stadium card from their hand, discard the Stadium card after discarding this one. So the reason you play this, the original list did not play it, but the reason you play it is because of Silent Lab. This deck deathly hates Silent Lab. Silent Lab turns off our Final Dig and our Bench Barrier, allowing us to be incredibly vulnerable and not making much progress on the board state. If we know our opponent is running Silent Labs in their deck, we're just going to chain Chaotic Swell to keep our Pokemon safe and keep the final digs going. And PokéStop is a new addition to the deck. I'd put this in as well. This deck originally ran 2 stadiums. I think you want to run 3. PokéStop is great here. It's essentially a mini Clay, but it's for both players. Once during either player's turn, the player may discard the top 3 cards of your deck. If they discard any items, put them into your hand. Your opponent can actually do this as well, but honestly, you don't even mind if your opponent uses the stadium because they're adding to your win con, which is actually huge. If they PokéStop and they discard cards they need, or even if they get items that allow them to just like go through the deck, that is 3 less cards in their deck. So essentially a no-brainer. You use PokéStop all the time. If PokéStop gets knocked out of play, I'm usually Lusamining it back. It's the best stadium in here. And then the other stadium, just for assurance, is Sky Pillar. Prevent all damage of opponent's attack done to your bench Pokemon. Use this just in case Mr. Mime is not going to be a live piece in the game. If he's prized and the such, you want a second out, and having one that you can get back over and over with Lusamine makes sense. This deck is essentially just a very straightforward mill deck. You're just going to mill your opponent's deck out really fast. It's a lot of fun to play. You obviously, like I said, have your auto losses. Shadow Rider is like a no-win scenario, and Volcarona V is impossible to win against. But there are some just really fun games you can have if you just want to have a just pure mill deck, in the essence of Durant Mill in a way. I hope you really digged this deck, because that is all this deck does, is shovels and digging. Thank you all so much for watching.